You know, every single day, all around us, there are these invisible rules. They're like walls that guide how we act and help us feel safe. And they're not just, things we do to be polite. They're the actual written down principles of criminal law. So today, we're going to pull back the curtain and make those invisible walls totally visible.
But hey, before we dive into all the theory, let's kick things off with a little puzzle. Get this, you're on a flight from Tokyo to Manila. You're thousands of feet over the Pacific Ocean, and suddenly, a crime happens. Now, the person who did it is American. The victim, they're French, and the airline itself is registered in the Philippines. So, whose laws do we use? Which police force gets the call? And whose courts get to decide the case? I mean, this isn't just a law school question. It's a real-world mess that criminal law has to figure out how to untangle.
All right, so to even begin to unravel that puzzle, we've got to go back to square one. We have to ask the most basic question of all. What in the world is criminal law, really? Well, think of it as the most important rulebook our society has.
Okay, here's the formal textbook definition. I know it sounds a little dry, but let's unpack what it's actually saying. First, it's public law, which just means it's about the rules between you and the state, not just between two people. Then, it defines crimes. It literally writes down what we as a society have all agreed is out of bounds. And this is the most important part. It provides for their punishment. It sets the stakes. It lays out the consequences for breaking those rules.
So if you think about it, we're all playing in this massive, complicated game called society. And criminal law, that's the official rulebook. It tells you where the out-of-bounds lines are, what counts as a foul, and what the penalties are if you get caught. It's the one set of rules that everyone is supposed to play by so the game stays fair and, more importantly, safe for everybody. Without it, it's not a game, it's just chaos, a total free-for-all.
So that brings us to the first massive principle in this rulebook, and it answers a really big question. Who actually has to follow these rules? The answer is this simple but incredibly powerful idea called generality.
The principle of generality basically means the law is the ultimate equalizer. It doesn't care if you're a local or tourist. It doesn't care if you're rich or poor or what your job is. If you commit a crime inside the territory, the laws of that territory apply to you. Period. It's like the law just strips away all those personal details and says, nope, the rules apply to you.
You know, a really great way to picture this is to think of the law as a rainstorm. When a storm rolls over a town, the rain falls on absolutely everyone. It doesn't stop and check who lives where. It falls on the big fancy houses and the small apartments. It falls on the people who've lived there their whole lives and the people just visiting for the day. It doesn't pick and choose. And that's exactly how the law works. Within its territory, its authority just falls on everyone equally.
Okay, so generality tells us who the law covers. But what about where? Well, our next big principle is called territoriality. And maybe the best way to think about it in our modern world is a concept we all kind of get now. A digital geofence.
So the principle of territoriality is actually pretty straightforward. At its core, it just means a country's laws work within its geographical borders, and that's it. But here's the key. Territory isn't just the dirt you can stand on. It's everything, the land, the rivers, the oceans right off the coast, and even the column of air stretching all the way up into the sky. The second you step inside that boundary, you've basically triggered the geofence, and boom, the local laws are now active for you.
Seriously, think about how your phone gets a notification when you walk into a certain store. Or maybe like one of those invisible fences for a dog. It's an invisible line, but crossing it triggers a whole new set of rules. You can't look out of an airplane window and see the exact line where one country's legal power ends and another's begins. But trust me, that line is as real and as solid as any physical wall.
All right, so we've got who the law applies to and where it applies. So the next logical question has to be, when? This brings us to our third fundamental principle, prospectivity. And this one has a rule that's really easy to remember.
Okay, the principle of prospectivity means the law only looks forward. It never looks back. So you can't be punished for doing something today that was perfectly legal, even if tomorrow they pass a law that makes it a crime. But, and this is a really cool exception, check this out. If a new law makes the punishment for a crime less severe, then it can be applied backwards. So it's basically a one-way street of fairness that only ever works in favor of the accused person.
So here's the bottom line. The law can't hop in a time machine, go back to last week, and arrest you for something that wasn't illegal then. I mean, can you imagine the chaos if it could? This is a huge protection against governments just making up rules on the fly.
It makes sure that the societal rulebook we're all using is stable and predictable. You get to know the rules of the game before you start playing.
Okay, so we've got our three big pillars, right? Generality, territoriality, prospectivity. The law applies to everyone, inside the lines, from this moment on. They seem pretty absolute, don't they? But, and this is what makes the law so fascinating, for just about every big, powerful rule, there's an equally powerful exception. The rules can, and they absolutely do, bend. So let's go back to that geofence idea. We said the law stops at the border. But what if a crime happens that is so serious, so important to a country's survival, that it needs to stretch its legal arms beyond that border to do something about it? What happens when somebody commits a crime way outside the fence?
This is where a country's laws can have a really long reach. For example, a Philippine ship or an airplane is legally considered Philippine territory no matter where it is on the planet, which, hey, starts to give us an answer to our puzzle from the beginning. The other exceptions are all about a country protecting itself. I mean, it makes sense, right? A nation has to be able to go after people who are printing fake money or committing acts of treason, even if they're doing it on the other side of the world.
Now, beyond just where a crime happens, the law cares a lot about the type of crime we're talking about. There are really two flavors of wrong. The first is called mala in se. These are things like murder that are just wrong. They're inherently evil, and pretty much everyone agrees on that. For these crimes, your intent is a huge deal. But then there's mala prohibita. These are acts that are only wrong because we passed a law saying they are. Think of a parking violation. For these, it often doesn't matter what you intended. The fact that you did it is enough.
So, we've talked about who, where, when, and even the very nature of the crime itself. But all of these principles and rules, and even the exceptions, they aren't just a random collection of legal facts. They're all individual threads that are woven together to create this incredible tapestry. And that tapestry is a single fundamental promise made to every single person.
And that promise is called due process. This is the big one. This is the bedrock that the entire system is built on. It's the ultimate promise that the government won't just act on a whim. It's the guarantee that the rules will be followed, that you'll get a chance to tell your side of the story, and that the whole thing is guided by a basic sense of justice and fairness. It's the heart and soul of the system's integrity.
And I absolutely love this quote because it just brings everything full circle so perfectly. Remember how we started with this idea of society as a game and the law as the rule book? Well, due process is the spirit of that game. It's more than just the rules. It's about the sporting idea of fair play. It is the promise that no matter who you are or what you're accused of, the game itself will be played fairly.
So, there you have it. We've mapped out those invisible walls of justice. We looked at the big rules that decide who, where, and when the law applies. But now, the real question is for you. Now that you know about generality, territoriality, and prospectivity, how do you see these rules playing out? In the news you read, in the history you know, in the world just outside your window. The game, after all, is always being played.